Ali Brown, everybody, getting nice and involved. This is not Ask the Devs. This is just discussion. And he's getting very involved, which is nice. So let's run through all the things that he answered and the questions that they come from. The first one here was, do you know if the fauna from planets is also going to react to the biome generation as well, or just be randomly scattered? They answered that one. He says, yes, fauna will also have rule sets about the type of habitat they require, such as long grass, tree canopy, temperature, availability of water, etc. Yeah, they had answered that one before. Continuing on with the questions, man, Genesis keeps sounding, actually, we can start from this thread. So let's go down from here. We already read all these questions. It's a lot of questions about things like glacier melt. How do things like meadows spawn? Are there more exotic planets? A humanopolis, how would that look? And roads. That's generally the 5 different questions he asks. So here's what Ali has to say about it. Genesis models natural rules at a fine scale, such as deciding which planets will grow where and how rocks are distributed based on large-scale geologic data sets. And then it allows the results to be viewed from orbit. But the actual source data is largely up to the artists to decide. And although they may use many simulation and procedural tools to aid this, they can still basically draw continents wherever they please and pick the temperature at any specific location. Okay, so this is not a full planet procedural tool. I mean, maybe it could be, but he's being very clear that there's still a lot of artist input on these planets, and that's why they've changed from the whole idea of 100 systems down to just 5, at least for the release. They're going to keep adding more, but the planets they were going to have before were just balls of art that we could not visit, and the ones that we could visit, you could only land in the city, and that was all like a pre-done video, kind of like in Star Wars Outlaws. So they've completely changed the idea of what a planet is, which is why there's so many less planets. But I think even now, with the planets we have more points of interest than they had planned in the original game already. So it's a different scale, but their tool, good lord, this thing's gonna have to go through a lot of work to really work. All right, continuing on with his answer. Vegetation uses rules based on soil quality, temperature, humidity, light availability, competition, reproductive rate, and more. Trees will dominate if the conditions are right, but lower quality soil or cool temperatures are likely factors for fewer trees. Also, we pick per planet which species are available, so each planet will have a unique combination. I do really like this because it makes it feel less like if you land somewhere on Hurston, you're on Hurston and you're good. It's going to be really nice when there are actually different parts of the planet that have more value because they have more trees or more minerals, or they're closer to the space station or stuff. Sorry, that was a weird thing to say. For rocks, the artists generate rock aggregate size maps, geology type maps, and soil depth maps. The offline simulations for these use corrosion and weathering to determine how the rocks and soil are broken down and transported. The runtime algorithm then combines these data sets procedurally and scatters the rocks based on the combined results. So, not glaciers, but that's okay. I'll be okay if they don't model glacier discharge. So the follow-up that we got was, is the scattering deterministic? For example, will visiting the same place twice result in rocks in the same place? Just wondering about base building. He says, yes, it's fully deterministic because the server and client don't share any information about the planet spawn at runtime, but needs to perfectly match. We've had nasty bugs in the past where the precision of certain operations on Linux were slightly different, leading to different results, which then means you can smash into an invisible rock. Oh, you don't say. Smashing into an invisible rock sounds all too familiar. He responded by saying, thank you for the reply. This would imply that the position of rocks and therefore minables will be different across different shards. If a cluster of something mineable spawns in one location on shard A, then shard B will have the mineable in that same position with the same composition? He's asking that question. Ali Brown said, not necessarily. For minables, we may defer the decision on composition to the server to randomize. That means it's not going to the global entity. Can we not with this song? Dude, f off. The number of these is very limited compared to the overall number of rocks and trees, which we couldn't hope to send over the network. Okay. Yeah, this does have interesting complications for base building, but that's where the question that we originally started with comes in. So the thinking here is, if shards don't have the same rock positioning between them, then, as has been explained, when a bases constructed on a planet in one shard, and then you have to transition to the other shard to attack that base or to do anything else, really. Will there be rocks randomly spawning in that shard? That's where Ali Brown comes in with the answer we originally started with, that the minables spawn within rocks. The mineable system does not spawn extra rocks. What makes me excited about that is, does that mean that the mineable rocks are going to look the same as normal rocks? Maybe that's the case in the game right now. Maybe I haven't paid enough attention, but I feel like a lot of times I'm mining in Star Citizen and it's just super obvious which rocks are mineable. Are they going to start to add them just to regular rocks? That would be amazing. But he's saying here basically that bases are safe because of the way they determine rock spawning. Okay, there's one more here. Asking for a fun fact, what is the compute time for the offline simulation for a planet? Oh boy, that's a question. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to this, Ali said. It's not a single process, but many individual height maps at 3 different scales, each with their own form of simulation. The rocks are also generated offline with simulations, which I believe start with a cliff and literally procedurally chip away at it into smaller pieces. Oh, that's pretty cool. That's how they simulate the way that rocks are spawning off of cliffs. Another question for him. Thanks to you and your team for the work on Genesis. Think it's fundamental. I have a question that I'm not sure you can answer, but will Genesis also improve desert type moons and planets with dunes and generally sandy terrains? He says yes. Many of the improvements will help desert planets and moons. Obviously not so much that the vegetation scattering, but the terrain detail, the geology, the rocks, and the mining. Cool. Another question. How's it going to work with the existing POIs on planets that either use the terrain or modify the terrain to get a certain look? This would be like that Mercury Star Runner crash. Unfortunately, Ali says, we can't preserve the height max of existing locations as that would require a large amount of extra memory. We could theoretically use Genesis with 0 changes to the height map, but then we'd lose a large amount of the visual upgrade too. I wonder if we're going to lose some of those bespoke crash derelict sites that they have when they switch over to Genesis and Stanton. Maybe they'll remake them there, but that's interesting. Somebody else said, will Genesis also simulate terrain deformation based on weather in real time, or say a huge battle takes place and the land is permanently scarred? He said it's mostly concerned with initial generation of the planets. More dynamic elements would be a future thing. And that's not confirming that either. All right, and then we already answered that question with the fauna. We saw that. So that is it. Little update on some Genesis stuff. We appreciate Ali Brown with his openness, sharing more information, but hope you got a little bit of an update from that. And you're more informed going forward about it.